Welcome to our I-WIN session on regional team-based challenges. I'm Heather Penzak, Director of Innovation and Implementation here with Education System Center, who helps facilitate and lead this network here of communities across the state. We're always so gracious and willing to just share about their models, share about their resources. I'm really excited today. We have 3 different communities from across the state here are going to share with you about what they do to support team-based challenges within their region. And so would love, just as always, to kick us off. You know, one of the most exciting things sometimes about I-WIN is how folks meet one another, even within these presentations or within the chat. So I'd love to know, who you are, introduce yourself. And then, for our presenters, our communities, as they're thinking about what they're sharing and really addressing what's top of mind for you. If you have any particular questions, things that you're like, I'm trying to do a team-based challenge, or I have a team-based challenge, I'm wondering these things, please go ahead and put that right into the chat here. And so we can address those as we're moving throughout the presentation here. But again, just throughout, please make sure that your computer, any phones, if you're joining that way, is muted. If I mute you at all at any time, it's really just so that we can make sure we hear from the presenters. But please put your questions, any comments in the chat as well as we're going throughout. So giving you all a moment there to introduce, and then just any questions, again, top of mind for you about team-based challenges, we can make sure to address those. As you all are doing that, I'll go over a bit of the plan here for today. So if you got this invite, you saw it was a little bit longer than our usual I-WIN session. So the plan is really from 10 to 11, going to have those community presentations. They'll share their general overview, talk about some lessons learned, challenges overcome. They all have lots of best practices, resources to share with you all as well. And then after each community presents, those will be about 15 minutes, but we'll do 5 minutes of Q&A after, and then the goal is to do some smaller breakout rooms, depending how big our group.
Oh no, really?
Right. And think about moving into those smaller breakout rooms. Each community will be hosting a room generally. So if you have additional questions, want to engage in some small group discussion, that'll very much be the space for that. But like I said, we're also going to have time for, maybe 2 or 3 questions after each presentation. Thank you all. It's wonderful to see you here in the chat. Starting to look at some of these questions any here. Looks like some folks offer a few challenges already, which is awesome. And so if this is your first I-WIN, I-WIN is the Illinois Work-Based Learning Innovation Network. We really are here to connect communities across the state, highlight and explore those innovative models, especially as we think about those that really drive access and equity, and our students who may not have that access to the experience or to the social capital that's built there without kind of having these opportunities, and really making sure that we're being intentional about who we recruit, who we engage, how we support young people to engage in these opportunities. And also things bubble up here, policy supports, other questions, things that just kind of need to be unpacked. And so very much welcome you to explore the I-WIN Resource Hub. It has all the previous presentations, lots of resources on there. And then we have our newsletter as well. So I'm gonna do one more just in the chat here, if you don't have it already, the link to today's presentation, which has all these different links that you're going to see throughout it. We really focus in on the whole continuum through I-WIN. So looking at that career awareness, students maybe more independently taking surveys, watching videos, moving into career exploration, where now they're really engaging directly with an industry person, guest speaker, a site visit, job shadow. Today, we're going to hone in on those team-based challenges. And so you can see within the continuum, these really sit in the middle, right? So they're more intensive of a role of that employer, that industry person, the managing organization, the school, the community-based organization, whoever's kind of coordinating this, their role is still there, but it's lessening, right? And it's really moving into that employer having that. Within the team-based challenge, you can actually see almost an equal role there. But this really is a great opportunity to prepare young people, have even more confidence built in them, to then move into those more intensive career development, youth, or pre-apprenticeship type programs where they may be acting more independently. And all the definitions for these are within the Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary. Want to put this here again, so we're all kind of working from the same context. A team-based challenge as defined within our Illinois Career Pathways Dictionary is a group problem-based learning project relating to an individual's career area of interest that involves a problem relating to employers within that area, including mentoring from adults with expertise in that area, and requires the individual to present the outcomes of the project. So there's kind of three key things in here. It's problem-based. It includes an employer or an industry expert, adults with expertise, right? Really engaging as a mentor within this process. And then there's the presenting the outcomes of the project. I'll put a piece there, right? There's no required template for what that presentation is. So if it's a PowerPoint, if it's a video, if it's a whole song and dance, right? Whatever really makes sense for those individuals, that team, to share, what they came up with as their solution, how they're going to address the challenge. That can be very flexible on the presentation. And so there's lots of things you can think about here in terms of best practices, right? But some key ones, and I think some pieces you'll hear too are, really thinking about who are your adults with expertise, being intentional about that. Those are your employer partners, your post-secondary, there's community-based organizations. You have in-house staff who are experts. And I know during especially when schools were fully remote, we're really thinking about where are they engaging more their families, kind of understanding where within their space they have expertise within that community as well. Embedding these within coursework is also great, for tracking purposes, one, so you kind of know a student who's completed these because they completed these courses, but also because it really helps bring that curriculum to life, right? If you're thinking especially about some intro level courses or dual credit opportunities, how do you really get students excited about a pathway, understanding that career area, understanding how it connects to what they're learning, and they really get to dive in and dig in on it. Would also very much encourage you all to think about existing opportunities, your CTSOs, your career tech student organizations. They have a lot of these kind of experiences already teed up, ready to go. But any of those professional associations, other extracurricular organizations, they really do a lot of this and can be great partners and inspiration for your own team-based challenges. And there's a link here, just additional recommendations as you're thinking about quality criteria and really wanting to have that robust experience for young people and for those industry mentors and your teachers, which you'll hear about today too. The student experience really should be driven by those open-ended problems with no one right answer. They are self-directed, they're active investigators, problem solvers, working in those small collaborative groups. I have a chart here of just kind of the cycle of those pieces, right? Where they're researching. The star kind of represents the moment when your industry mentor will come in and adopt that role as a facilitator, right? Guiding that, probing on things, promoting that environment of inquiry. And they really will kind of identify that key problem, ultimately agree on their solution or the way that they're going to address this. They'll develop a plan, evaluate, re-examine. I put implement there as a question mark. It's not a requirement of the definition or the experience, but as you might have, more long-term or even kind of one-day challenges, right? With students could implement, try something out, right? And then reflect back whether they feel like that worked or didn't work or what they might have adjusted. That's just a really, really cool opportunity for young people, but some things you can't implement, right? I use the example of if you're designing what airplanes might look like in 2050, you're not going to build a whole airplane, right? But there are some other things where you might be able to kind of do your solution as a team and then see what happens with that. I like to put this up here. I recently worked with a group of Chicago Public Schools CTE teachers who engaged as students within a team-based challenge. And we really talked a lot about what is problem versus project-based, right? So sometimes these words can get used interchangeably, but when you're thinking about project-based there on the left, things are a bit more directed. It's more structured, it's more pre-designed, resources are typically laid out, right? There may or may not be different pathways to the project, right? It has really this kind of end product, and it tends to be more teacher, more school driven, right? Whereas we look on the right, problem-based, it's very much just this creative, there's all kinds of different solutions. outcomes are very much relevant to the industry, to that person, right? They change maybe every single year, right? Depending on what's going on with the industry. And so really looking to, I mean, you can see in that bottom right, like it might be a bit more time consuming, more creative, having to work from some scratch. But it really is very human-centered, relying on the experts and the guidance within a community. And so want to just kind of close here with the overview and turn to our communities with some resources available for you all. Through iWin, we have a team-based challenge resource bank, which has ideas for inspiration and also templates for each of the college and career pathway endorsement areas. And some of the templates you can see here, they really scope out for you. Get a lot of questions about how long should these be? And so you'll see some of these templates are a week, some of them are a day, some of them are multiple weeks, right? It really is just what makes the most sense for your community, your students, your industry mentors, the challenge itself, what that time looks like. And you'll hear about those today. But lots of other pieces here for you too. Communities have developed their own work-based learning toolkits that contain checklists, tips, and fact sheets for team-based challenges. There's some templates here that, again, are not required for any sort of real purpose, but just there for you to put some thoughts down, get thinking, some design questions for you as you're designing, and then also a sample rubric, inspired actually by some of the work that Samsung had did, kind of leading students through pitches and helping them address kind of industry challenges. But just there for you to be thinking about the whole process, how you might assess that and incorporate that into your classroom. And again, just a whole bunch of other resources here, thinking about your HOSA, one of those CTSOs, also like Skills USA. I know one of our communities will kind of talk about how they utilize them for their team-based challenges, but Educators Rising, Project Lead the Way, like all this stuff is really, really here for you to look at, get inspired, and think about how it might make the most sense to incorporate within your own space. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to our Ridgewood community here. And again, just let me know and I will click through for you all.
Great, thank you. So before talking, I want to give a lot of credit. Tristan Kumar had played a large role in this team-based challenging that we're going to present today. He's actually at DECA competition today, so he's not able to present with us. But Ridgewood High School hosted a team-based challenge for the education pathway back in October. We opened it up to any schools that wanted to participate in the Chicagoland area. And you can sort of look, we did have schools as far up as Granton High School, then a lot of them, just west of the Chicago suburbs that participated in this team-based challenge. So what did the education team-based challenge look like? I'd like to just sort of walk you through, the process. So the schedule that we had here is, we wanted to make sure to have some sort of icebreaker, get the kids comfortable. As you have all these different schools sort of coming together. The introduction also, we hosted this at Triton College because we didn't have the room to host something like this. So the president of Triton College actually came out, did the welcome, talked to the students a little bit, and then we did an icebreaker. After that, we had our competition overview. What is the team-based challenge? Where are the students going to work? And then we actually had that team time. All right, time to go get to work. There was lunch involved along with presentations with the judges. The judges then figured out the winners, and then the winners were announced and we had our dismissal. In this particular case, we did have winners. In your team-based challenges, you don't necessarily have to have it be a competition where there are winners. Main thing is that you provide the students with feedback at the end. So if you go on to the next slide, the components we want to make sure to have, and as Heather was going over them, we wanted to make sure we had some authentic problems, from in collaboration with our industry partners, and it worked out well because our industry partners in this case were, the schools and education programs. We wanted to make sure that they had a solution. They had some sort of presentation where they can to an authentic audience. So we were able to get a lot of people from that. Even that did not have schools represented there. There's some people that from all over, even as far as Peoria, that came, helped us out with this product, with being mentors and then judging in the end. So several leaders from different schools participated along with Triton as far as being mentors and then being an authentic audience. Students worked in teams, so they got to choose. We had some teams were 3, some teams were up to 5. And then was going to have that mentoring piece that was involved in this. And we talked about the technical competencies and the essential competencies. Based on what students picked, they had some different competencies that went with them. And then we had a rubric, and we gave those, each student group had a rubric as far as how they were going to be evaluated and provided feedback. So that's sort of like an overview of what we want to make sure to have in this team-based challenge. So if you go on the next slide, it was really good to start off with some sort of an icebreaker in the team-based challenge. So we did a Kahoot and just asked a lot of questions, had some statistics about number of teachers out there, especially with the teacher shortage, just so those students can sort of get an idea about the general ideas of just the education pathway alone. On the next slide, we then presented, all right, here are the competitions, and go ahead and choose. So that way teams got to choose what competition would like to compete in, or challenge would be a high school. They had to create a high school lesson plan, elementary lesson plan, designing a classroom, and then equity, diversity, and inclusion action plan. So that way students had choice, what was something that interests them. For each school though, we asked that, they had one team, if one team picked one of these four, have another team pick another one until, at least if you had all four of them represented, you had more students that want, two groups that want to do a second one, that was fine as well. So once we sort of said, all right, here's what the four things are, we want to go a little bit more in depth before students chose, the groups chose what challenge they're going to do. So we gave them an overview. Here's the high school elementary lesson plan, the things that you'll be doing. The next slide, you'll see design your classroom. So just once again, an overview. And then finally, the diversity, equity, inclusion overview as well, as far as what they're going to do. Once the students picked their plan, then they got a lot more information about each of those. So those are just overviews, but I think it's important to give a little bit more detail as far as what they're expected to do. So if you go on the next slide, you'll see a sample. So if you chose to do equity, diversity, inclusion, then we sort of presented it as in a challenging statement. Here's what your problem is, here's what we'd like you to do, and then gave them, a little bit more details as far as, okay, here's now sort of the mission and the steps that you're going to be creating in this plan. As part of the team-based challenge as well, we wanted to, if you go on the next slide, talked about providing a rubric. So how will they be evaluated? How will we provide them with feedback? So each one of those team-based challenges, all four of them had a rubric. This is just a little small clip of the rubric. The rubric actually has more items below if you kept going on that. And we had rubrics for each of those plans. I'm not going to show you all the rubrics in detail, but if you have a copy of this presentation, I put in links to each of these team-based challenges that has all this information in there. So you'll have can look through those if you'd like. On the next slide then. So just some advice based on some of the team-based challenges that we've done, especially some of these larger ones, is we want to always make sure, and as we plan this out, we want to make sure that they're engaging to the students. Are you meeting sort of students' interest? Last thing you want to do is create a team-based challenge where the students are looking at it, something they really don't want to do, but they will do it. So as much as you can get them engaged and find something they're passionate about, the better. We also learn to keep them simple. In a lot of these, you're creating really a foundation, not like a final product. So really creating the foundation, like even those lesson plans, you're creating sort of an outline of lesson plans. You're not actually going to be teaching a lesson plan. Same thing with the equity, diversity, inclusion, sort of what would you like to be in there? Give us an outline. And then that's something they can take with them and do more work with later if they wanted to. It seems like you're always going to need more time. In this, we felt like if we would have doubled the time we had for this team-based challenge, we definitely could have used it. And then student feedback. So really, as I said earlier, it's not really about winning competition. It's about students getting feedback so they can see what did they do well, what can they do better, what can they really, it's about learning. What can they learn and take away from this? And then the final thing was, it's great to engage with other schools. When kids from one school can engage with other schools, it's really good. Even at the end of this team-based challenge, we had students asking, other schools, can you share your presentation? We really like what you had. We'd like to see if we can use that in our schools. So those are some of the things that just as we planned this out and went through this, maybe some advice for them. And then in looking at the team-based challenge, if you want to go to the next slide, immediately after we did our team-based challenge, we did a reflection with and there was actually Dolores Miller, Tristan Kumar, and myself. We sort of reflected and said, all right, what did we do well? What we'd like to do better next time? And then what are some future competition ideas? Because they'd like to have this be a continual thing, at least a yearly product where we can provide these students with team-based challenges. So these are just some ideas that we generated as we looked at planning next year's challenge. So speaking of the next challenge, if you go on to the next slide, Ridgewood will be hosting another team-based challenge June 12th from 9 to 1 p.m. All schools in the Chicagoland area are invited to this. The authentic problem, which, once again, this is very organic. Talking to another principal in our school, we're talking about what are we going to do about the AI? How are we going to respond in a good way and not just be like, oh, AI is evil. And we know we're going to have challenges next year during the school year. So the authentic problem is we really need to promote responsibility for the use of AI to enhance learning and academic integrity in schools. So that's sort of the challenge we're going to present to the students. And we're going to ask them to create the policies and procedures for the school on how they should handle this. Because one thing we realized, if we don't train our students on this and get them used to it, well, they'd be at a disadvantage. It's almost like when the graphing calculators came out, they're not the evil thing. It's just how do we use them appropriately. So we will be hosting a team-based challenge and inviting other schools. If you go on to the next slide, and the EFEs, this will be sent out through the EFEs. But what's going to be included with the team-based challenge, we do have mentors around the country, because once again, we want that mentorship piece. You get those experts in the field that will be there to work with the students. When you look at the technical competencies, and it's really important when you're doing these, identify those, but it'll be managing and monitoring learning. The essential competencies will be critical thinking, teamwork, and problem solving. And then it will be in collaborative groups where students will work with 3 or 5. And when you do, just a little, when you do create your team-based challenges for career and pathway endorsement, they want you to be very specific and put in there. Students will work in groups of 3 to 5, groups of 4. They always want that stuff in there as you're filling it out. And then the final product is a presentation. And once again, it's just outlining proposed policy that really with the rationale behind what we're doing. And then we'll have a rubric for students to be evaluated on with that. And this team-based challenge is meant to just generate the basic foundation. And we're hoping that schools will then take this foundation and go back and they'll actually create the policies a little bit more sort of work. They can work with their administrators, but sort of create these policies. So as you start the school year off, you have something in place. So just a team-based challenge that, once again, is about as authentic and organic as you can get. As we identified this need and created this, it works well when we come up with a team-based challenge. So if you go to the next slide, this if you have this presentation, you'll see the links. It'll have the rubrics to our our high school and elementary. It has team-based challenge along with equity, diversity, inclusion one. And then also you'll see our after action analysis that we do with our team-based challenge with our ideas. So, and then please feel free to contact me with any questions.
Thank you so much, Eric, and kudos to you and your whole team for this. And I love this AI one coming up. I know Ginger will for sure be curious to see what your students are saying about AI. Would love to open it up here if there's a couple of questions for Eric about this team-based challenge.
Hi, Eric. I may have missed it, but oh, sorry. Are we typing or are we talking? My bad.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. I may have missed it, but as they were sitting in groups and working on this, did they submit that then electronically to some like database you had, or how did they submit that?
No, they what they did is we were like I said, we were very fortunate to have a lot of judges. We brought a lot from Ridgewood, and we had some people that came to like observe, and they were willing to be judges. So each group presented to at least 2 different judges. I think most of the time we try to get it to 3 judges. And then the judges got together, went over the rubrics and discussed it with each other. I will say the one thing that we probably need to do a better job of is providing more feedback to them, the students. 'Cause like I said, we sort of ran out of time. And that's probably one of the biggest things that, like, if you look at our action analysis, after action analysis is, we were able to give them some feedback right then, but it would be nice as the judges met to come back and say, all right, here's what we had as a rubric, here's some feedback. But yeah, they presented, to the judges. So. How many students attended this event? I want to say probably about 70 to 80 students attended. So it was probably average about 10 students per school.
Yes, then you had like 7 or 8 schools then, or what was the?
Yeah, we had 7 schools.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to unmute myself because Eric, I believe I saw you in Bloomington at the IACTE conference present. I'm pretty sure that were you there? Did you present at that conference?
Yes.
Okay. And this has like growed ideas of the Southern Illinois Future Teachers Coalition, SIFC, down the southern part of Illinois to do a regional based team-based challenge event. Although we have 15 high schools, we're getting ready to add 5 more. So it truly will be a whole Southern Illinois effort. You're saying 70 or 80. We're looking at over 300 students. Do you think that this could possibly be grown to that size and still be feasible?
Yes, because if you look at it, you're probably going to add some more. We had 4 different things to select. If you add more and then you sort of split up based on those, I don't know. Hopefully you got a big enough facility. That'd be the biggest
we're
thing.
holding it on a community college campus.
Yeah, so if you're able to do that and then split them up into groups where you have somebody leading each group, and it's also having those mentors, I think then you'll be in good shape. But just you're probably going to need a little bit more time. Like ours was like 9 to 1:30. If you can start earlier.
Right.
Like 8:30 and probably go till 2:30.
Right.
I think you'll be in good shape.
All right. Thank you.
And something I appreciate too, Eric, even on this previous slide here, if it'll let me go over there, is the like variety of challenges, right? So when you're thinking about, even Brooke, I'm thinking about 300 students, right? Like you might have students who want to engage in a more like intense challenge or something a bit more straightforward, or right, you can kind of really think about your students and the different ones who are there. But I just love here too, Eric, like I think sometimes we make it too complicated, the team-based challenge, right? And like there's actually some things like the writing a student parent letter describing your course. Like as a former teacher, sometimes that's actually really hard. It's like, how am I going to say this in a way that's like accessible to students and families, and right? But it's a very important challenge that you're going to have to address as a teacher. So appreciate these. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move us. Thank you again, Eric, and the whole Ridgewood team. And I'll share your invite and see if you get some folks registered up. Is there a deadline to register for the event?
Yeah, actually the week before.
Okay.
We will be feeding anybody that comes. We'll be feeding them. We'll have breakfast and we'll be feeding them lunch. So that's
right.
A week before, so we can get the food ordered correctly.
Which is important, very important. Well, thank you all again so much. If you have questions for Eric and their team, please feel free to put those in the chat, or again, very gracious to share their information here. But I'm going to go ahead and move us over to our team from Waubonsee to talk about their health sciences team-based challenge.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Gaspar. I'm the Career and Technical Education Services Manager. And so me and my colleagues are going to share with you our healthcare skills event, our team-based challenge, if you will. So you can go to the next slide, please. So I'll just read off everyone's names, but I'll let them kind of chime in as they share their part of the agenda. But I was lucky enough to be working with Andrea Montgomery, our Assistant Professor of Fire Science Technology and Emergency Medical Technician Program. Dr. Margie Schoolfield, our Associate Professor of Nursing and Associate Nursing Program Director. Lisa Geese, our Instructor of Medical Assistant in Phlebotomy. So it's a powerhouse team from our Health Professions and Public Service Division. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you a little overview, and then the faculty will share all the details. But we kind of started on this little adventure as a result of us working on our post-secondary program of study approval process for the medical assistant program. So we needed to address the work-based learning, team-based challenge component of that application. And so I knew right who to talk to. I have these wonderful colleagues, and so they got together and put this all together. So essentially our team-based challenge consisted of 2 to 4 students, teams of 2 to 4 students working to transition a patient through the medical assistant, the EMT basic, and our nursing program labs for treatment. So this was scenario-based. Students that participated were assessed by an external partner and received a score or feedback regarding their demonstration of skills. After after the event was over, students and faculty and the external partner debriefed afterwards to highlight their areas of strength, things they did really well, and then also kind of talked about things that they might do differently in, if they're faced with this situation in a workplace setting.
Hi, so I'm Andrea Montgomery, the EMT instructor. And so when Allison came to us with this idea, we all still currently work in the field. We've worked in the field as medical assistants, EMTs, nurses. So we realized that we could put together a very real world type of scenario for this, where our patient, started off in like a doctor's office setting. It was something where they realized that they, it was a little more serious and maybe they needed to be transported to the hospital. So our EMT students would assume care and then ultimately transfer to that hospital setting. So Margie and Lisa and I kind of just got together and came up with a scenario where all of our students would be able to show their skills and have a part in it that would be very realistic for them. When we created our rubric, we don't have one of them here on the slide, but we keep them extremely simplistic because we were inviting those industry professionals to come take time out of their day to be a judge for us. And we wanted to keep it simple so we didn't have to have a lot of time where we had to meet with them ahead of time and explain this. So it was just a real simple, it kind of had a list of the skills we expected from the students, which is kind of a 0 to 5, didn't do the skill at all, needed help, or, were very proficient and safe and quick at it. And it was just very simplistic. We each created our own rubric for our own part. So that's kind of another thing, is this whole process may sound like a lot, but once we got together just once or twice, we kind of all individually did our own part of the scenario and our own rubric, and then just came back at the end and put them all back together. So we each found our own judge. We found a couple patients, which finding that right patient that had kind of a knowledge of all 3 of these areas was very helpful too. So we found some patients that were EMTs who had also worked in a private ambulance setting, who had done this exact type of scenario where they had picked people up at a doctor's office and taken them to the hospital. So that really helped as well to identify those realistic patients. And we did have real life patients until we got to the nursing lab. Once we got to the nursing lab, it was then a mannequin that took over as part of the scenario. Next slide.
Okay, hi, I'm Lisa Geese, and I am head of medical assistant. So these are some of my medical assistant students here, and we started off with a patient, and this was a cardiac situation. So you can see here, my students are actually performing an EKG. So what we were looking for in our goals and expectations, I wanted to see how these students would communicate. And I know that they communicate well with each other in the classroom because they're used to each other. They're used to being in labs with each other and working together. But I wanted to see how they would communicate with a real patient, quote unquote patient, and how they would communicate with the EMT students who came in, to pick up the patient and bring them to the hospital. So that's kind of what I was looking for. And also how they would communicate with me. I actually played the doctor, telling them what they needed to do and things like that. So, and then we also were looking for, obviously, their knowledge of what the medical assistant role would be in an emergency situation. Did they catch that this was an emergency early enough? And, what did they do about it? Did they take the proper steps? And then also looking at, did they perform their vitals, their EKG, you know, everything that I told them to do, how was their performance? Did they perform, you know, well? And this is where we really use the rubric. And then obviously documenting in patient's charts, you know, after they were done or while they were going, were they documenting, were they writing down times that things were being done? And then participating in giving report to EMS when those students came in. Did they know how to give report? Did they know what to say? And stuff like that. So next slide. So once we finished, then we had some different observations. We did have a lot of positive things, and then we had some negatives. So the positives, students really worked well as a team. And they really delegated their responsibilities very well. With medical assisting, you usually only have one medical assistant in the room at once with a patient. So what I did is I had groups of 3. I would have one medical assistant in with the patient. And then once they realized that there was a quote unquote emergency, they would then go and get help. And the other 2 medical assistants in the group were actually pretending to be working in the office. So that's kind of how it went. And I was hoping that the medical assistant that was originally with the patient and found this as an emergency would kind of take over and delegate responsibilities. And that seemed to be the case, which was great. You know, they were like, hey, I need some help. Can someone come in here? And then just kind of started delegating. Excellent performance of their vitals and their EKG. They know their vitals. They got their vitals down. They got that. The EKG, they did that well as well. You know, they did it correctly. It's time, you know, we need to be a little bit quicker on things. And then they demonstrated entry-level knowledge of an MA role. I was pretty proud. The students did a pretty good job of doing what they were supposed to be doing. If I told them, you know, to give nitro or to do an EKG or call 911 or whatever I told them to do, they knew how to do that. Where students needed improvement, they needed more practice with emergency situations, because as soon as it became an emergency, you could see their face was like, oh, okay, now, oh, I don't know what, you know, what do I do now? They just kind of stood there for a second and had to think, okay, do I go get the doctor? Do I get help? What do I do? And then a big thing was communication with the patient. Their communication with their patient was lacking. They are because they're so new and they're students, they're so, you know, focused on what skill do I need to do next? Okay, I'm doing my EKG. I have to put on this lead, then I have to go to this lead, then I have to go to this. And they're forgetting to actually talk to the patient, seeing how are you feeling? Telling them what they're doing, you know, okay, we're going to be putting these leads on you. We're going to be taking this, we're going to be doing, you know, those kinds of things were kind of lacking. And that's expected. I mean, they're new and they're just kind of concentrating on what they need to do. And then practice and performing their skills quickly. Everything took a lot longer than expected. We knew and we know that they are students and that things would take longer, but I think it took even longer than we thought. The nice thing is we've done this twice now. We actually just finished our second one. And I think the second one went really, really well. I think the students, we do this once a year, and I think the students did really well this year. I think we got a little bit quicker. And I think we did a little bit better this year because as instructors, we could see what the students were doing last year and where they needed improvement. And so we got to put that into this year. And I think it went really well this year. So. Next slide.
All right, so just to kind of summarize, EMT was very similar to a lot of the things Lisa mentioned. We had teams of 3 that would come in, take that report from the medical assisting, and you can see our goals there. I'm not going to, you know, read them off to you, but our goals were to see how they implemented those skills we practiced in class into those real world situations and kind of get that good report from the medical assisting students, and then what's next, right? So the whole thing with all this was really testing kind of their critical thinking skills. Because again, in the classroom, yeah, they practice, we do this, and it's very patterned and they know what to expect. And we really wanted to have them think outside the box. So they took that patient, took over their skills, and then take that same format and pass it on to nursing. So do all their skills and then give the nursing a good report. We actually have radios, and the way our campus is set up, it's kind of nice because we all have our own labs that are very realistic. So we actually called the nurses students on the radios. So they had to take a radio report and then we'd wheel them over into there. Next slide, please. So again, very similar to Lisa, they were very good at the skills, the things we practiced in class that they were comfortable with. What we found what they needed to work on is, again, when we would kind of throw that little wrinkle into it and have something unexpected happen, how did they react to that? And like Lisa said, they would kind of like freeze up for a second, it would get real quiet and they wouldn't talk as much. And then, you know, you see they start to process in their head, like, okay, I should do this. So they were great at their skills, they were great communicating. But when things go bad, have that constant communication and adapt is really what we were looking at. And like Lisa mentioned, last year was the first time we did this. I think as instructors, we took a lot of this back into our classrooms instead of just, you know, teaching that very rigid like skills and this is how we're going to act, into throwing some of that into our classroom and how to adapt and critical think. So that worked out very well for us. Next slide.
Sorry about that. Hi, I'm Margie Schofield, and my students were the ones who did the nursing part of it. So these students are getting ready to graduate. They've had pretty much everything they need to know. And part of what was really nice with this was the fact that they did not know what was coming in. Typically, when we do simulation, they get a report on a patient. They have some time to look at the chart. This was real world. They were supposed to be in an ER and just getting ready for what comes next. So the report that they got was on the radio, which was different for them. Some of them wanted to ask way more questions than were necessary and take a full health history rather than find out what exactly is going on. So getting those critical details. We did have a charge nurse, a bedside nurse, a second nurse to do assessments and to provide, you know, to run and get medications or whatever was needed. The whole basis for what we were trying to do is have them go through and simulate a patient who was declining, who ended up needing CPR, because our simulated mannequins will actually measure the depth and how well they're doing CPR, get the patient back, and then give report to the cath lab. And we had a certain amount of time that we were trying to get that in place. Next slide, please. So just like everyone else has said, they worked really well as a team. The charge nurse was often the one who delegated really well. And if they did not, then the other nurse would, you know, kind of go into gear and say, what would you like me to do? Or I'm going to go do this or that. CPR was initiated fairly quickly. And the way we set up our students is we had two instructors, one who was running the mannequin, and then I was kind of running the, you know, just kind of observing the scenario. We had a third nurse who was there to do, who was our assessor and judging via a rubric that we had made. But the second nurse who was running the mannequin, her students are not quite as far into the program as mine. They're third semester versus fourth. And so they took on the role of being that PCT or that CNA, where they would do whatever was needed just to kind of support. Areas that we found for improvement were that they really needed more practice with emergency situations. Our emergency module is like a day and a half, so it's not a whole lot of time. Delegation, sometimes, just like they were talking about, when they got into a point where they were thinking and thinking and thinking, they just couldn't necessarily process what was supposed to come next. And so they stopped talking and slowed down. But once they got into the idea of what was happening and what they needed to do, then they kind of got busy and got performing very quickly. We did learn from the first year that more scenarios were needed for the scenario, more students, I'm sorry, were needed. We started with 3 year one. I think I had 5 this year, and that was probably a more realistic number because we could have everybody doing something. And this year I threw in the wrinkle of, I was playing the wife who got a call from the doctor's office that my husband was being transported to the ER. So I'm showing up kind of hysterical, wanting to know what's going on. And they had to take and do that psychosocial piece of things then as well. Next slide. So the students ended up really loving it. They really loved the fact that they were collaborating with people outside of the nursing department, and they felt it was a very realistic scenario. They loved being able to get that patient who was real. And even though we transitioned it to the mannequin, they were talking to the EMT students and kind of getting an idea of what this patient really looked like. It really did allow them to collaborate and think quickly and make quick decisions. And so we're going to continue to take what we learn and go forward with it from year to year to see if we can improve that and consider it with other groups as well. Next slide. And so again, the lessons learned is we need to have multiple patients. So this year we had 2 real patients. And so once they got to me, they started again. So by the time we were finishing up, we had just a few minutes before the next patient was arriving. And then one of the real life patients did it twice. So it was really a great way to keep it going because that first year was really long. This year we finished in a much more realistic time. We really love the way to consider how to share this with other departments and things like that. So we've talked in general about a number of different ways. And so Allison, do you want to jump in on any of that?
Sure. Yeah. So we've talked in previous discussions about, how do we increase, how do we make an opportunity for others to observe this process? This year we did have folks from our marketing department. They came to do photos, but they also came to do some video as well. And so I'll be interested to see what can we do with that video footage? Can we share it with our high school partners? Can we put it on our website? Things of that nature. We've also, we've chatted this whole session up a bunch to, internally and externally, because there's definitely, while this is very specific to healthcare, I think there's opportunities for folks to take this basic concept of overlapping connected fields and how do you transition this type of event to a manufacturing, scenario or, a computer support cybersecurity scenario. So, I think we're definitely, happy to answer anyone's questions in our breakout session, even if you're not, running healthcare programs. I think there's definitely a lot of overlap to other areas as well.
Next slide.
And this is just our contact information. So if we don't get a chance to connect today, or you think of questions later, please feel free to reach out to any of us. It's linked to the presentation.
And thank you so much again to our Waubonsee team. I saw this at a session of, is it a couple months ago now? I don't even know. Time again is so weird. And I was like, all right, you all got to come to IWIN because this is great. I really love, again, the pieces where you took what you learned last year and like, all right, what are some things we need to do within our courses to better get students grappling with that? The emergency piece, right? I mean, the whole even interconnected of these departments, you actually don't work in a silo of just nursing or just EMT or just medical, you will interact at some point, right, with these other areas. And I thought that was just really incredible. But want to give some time now. There's a couple of questions before we move to our presentation on manufacturing here. Which I'm surprised that there's not. But thank you all so much again. I think too, we'll have time in those smaller breakouts if you want to keep chatting about this. And again, to the point of, does this look like, in a different department that isn't health sciences? How might you connect those different pieces and get folks working together, right? All these different things, we never really work in silos within our occupations, right? We're interacting with others in there. But thank you all so much again. Contact info here, I always appreciate that. And I will turn to our final presentation here before we move into our breakout rooms. I'll turn over to Terry.
Thank you there, Heather. Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Stroh. I'm the EFE Director for Northern Kane County. With me today, I got Joe Siskowski.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm the Director of CTE Pathways in College and Career Readiness for School District 300.
And wanted to take time to tell you about or kind of give you some information about what we've done for our manufacturing welding departments. A little bit of background there. We have right now 2 high schools in the region that run manufacturing programs that are also regional programs. So we have students that move between high schools and across district lines to attend those manufacturing and welding programs. Our manufacturing programs are all NIMS certified, so students are earning their NIMS credentials in manufacturing. And then our welding program, we are the only 2 high schools in the entire state of Illinois that are American Welding Society accredited, and students will take their practical exams for their American Welding Society certifications coming up here later this month. So lots of information there with all of that. If you can go to the next slide. So for our team-based challenges, we've been working with our community college on some future events, but for the time being, we partner with Skills USA for all of our manufacturing, or most of our manufacturing. We also have the first one there, the Technology Manufacturers Association. They run a precision manufacturing event. The link there, if you click on it, it'll take you to the TMA slide, and they'll have you some information there. But what they do is they send blueprints out for different pieces that students are able to work within their own labs at all their high schools, working with their classmates. That was one of the big things, is because many of these competitions are still individually based. There's a lot of the collaboration happens on the classroom side or on the preparation side between their teachers and their fellow students there in the classroom. So it's a wide variety of pieces that the students will make. It's great because then once these pieces are done, the teacher has to box them up and ship them off to the TMA, to where they have business professionals that are grading all of those pieces and looking at the blueprints and then measuring how exact the parts are. To give you an example there, a couple of years ago, we had a part that 2 students from Hampshire High School both got perfect scores on the rubric, but the difference between first and second place was 1/1000th of an inch. So that awards night actually is coming up this Thursday. It's being held in Schaumburg over at Mazak. They're a manufacturing company there in Schaumburg that'll host. And for that event, they invite in, or the TMA invites in about 25 or so business partners to talk to students about their job opportunities, along with having all the student created parts out for display for parents and guests to observe. And then they do an award ceremony based on those measuring results there for that one. So lots of good things there with that. The next piece I'll talk about, I'll kind of let Joe jump into Skills USA as the last piece. The next piece there is the third bullet, the Project MFG. So this is a new competition that one of our schools got involved with last year. This is a competition that combines both welding and manufacturing. So students are given blueprints for a part, or have to design a part that they have to create in their lab. They then take and box that part off and ship it off to Project MFG to measure and grade. And then teams are invited to their national semifinals in regional events across the country. One of our high schools was lucky enough, this is the second year in a row that they made the national semifinals. Last year, they were one of only 2 high schools that qualified for the event. This year, they were one of only 3 high schools that qualified for the event, and they're competing against community colleges and universities that have manufacturing programs across the country. So students with a combination of the welding and the manufacturing, they have to have a manufactured piece, but then they also have a welding portion of a part that industry partners have put together the competition piece for them to build there on site. So they're given, I think, a total of 16 hours to do all of the programming and all of the design pieces there. And then actually to have to produce that part before they're done with those 16 hours. So quite a nerve-wracking piece there. Our students this year got to travel down to Southwestern Illinois College in Edwardsville to participate in that regional competition. While they didn't qualify for the national event that is going on this week in South Carolina, They did impress quite a few folks down there with that, considering that we don't have all the machinery required for the competition in our high school lab. So they've had to kind of adapt to the limits there, but some overall good pieces for that competition. And Joe, talk about Skills USA.
Thank you. I'm adding a link now to the chat for Skills USA events so that those of you not familiar can sort of see the timeline in the spring of how all this works. A brief overview of what this sort of series of events looks like is it starts with what they call an SQE, a state qualifying exam that is school-based and students take the exam. And then they move on, those that qualify for the state competition, that's usually the end of April. And then students that do place first there are invited to the national conference. It's really called the State Leadership or National Leadership in Skills Competition Conference. So it's both a conference for the students as well as this competition. So there's the 3 tiers there, and you'll see that in the events on the Illinois Skills USA website. One of the advantages with Skills USA, in addition to just welding and manufacturing, is as we navigate the CCPs and different requirements and best practice in CT with having CTSOs and team-based challenges, is that Skills USA is very wide as far as what they offer. There's culinary, there's CAD. So it addresses a wide range of our programs. So we're trying to do the best we can to also meet the expectations of a team-based challenge. So as we're doing that, some of these competitions are very much individualized in nature, but welding in general is sort of an individualized sort of career in some regards. But where we're trying to embed the team-based portion of it is through additional competitions, whether it be regional through ECC or our 2 districts offering these programs, or embedded just throughout our classes where students are supporting each other in the preparing and preparation for a Skills USA state or SQE. We regularly already embed employer feedback, as Terry mentioned, the AWS certification, and then for manufacturing NIM certifications. And we're going to continue to be working with additional employers to try to get them in to give additional feedback throughout our classes moving forward. So that's how we're trying to tackle some of the team-based approach to this, as we utilize this as a umbrella sort of organization to address team-based challenges across a number of our programs we offer.
And while Joe's finishing that up, I got to give kudos to our 2 high schools that competed in manufacturing there. Out of 19 competitions geared toward manufacturing for high school students, our region brought home 4 state champions from Skills USA a couple weeks ago. So 3 in manufacturing and 1 in welding. So a great job by our teachers and by our schools for really preparing our students in those areas.
Heather, if you can advance 1 slide. We mentioned that, one more. And then these are just some of the pictures from this past year's state competition, as Terry was mentioning. A couple of our winners, as well as sort of showing that they're giving feedback, like the team-based approach is happening. We just have to make sure we're being intentional in these individualized competitions to that we're encouraging the students to collaborate and embed that employer feedback when possible.
In that other slide that we passed up there, we're working with our community college partner on a regional welding competition. I know some of my colleagues also have these types of competitions in their area, but we're working on putting that together for possibly the fall or early winter, so that way we don't interrupt the preparation for Skills USA, and we don't kind of jam too much onto their plates. That's a big concern there, is if, once we get into the springtime, there's always so much going on with different events at schools that we don't want to overload them. So we're looking at ways to have that a regional welding competition partner with the community college. And this would be a kind of a tiered event where we have our welding fundamentals or our beginning students with an opportunity, as well as possibly our older students there who are preparing for their exams there in the spring. So overall, lots of good opportunity there for students.
The 2 challenges with Skills USA to have those up front is, one would be funding. especially as they continue making it further and further in the national series, as well as mainly staff time, because there is a commitment outside of school and traveling potentially as they qualify for state and nationals. But also students, if they're involved in spring sports and stuff, there is a commitment there that they have to potentially miss out on some time of other co-curricular activities. So
I think overall, the biggest piece there is it's nice to partner with someone who finds the partners, the industry partners for us in many ways. They create the rubrics and things like that. So we're not having to spend the time doing those pieces. We spend the majority of our time trying to make sure that our teachers have what they need at the school level, and that we can find the funding to make sure that we're continuing to support them for all these travel pieces and things like that.
Thank you both again so much. And I appreciate, I know we've had conversations too, but this, some things are really quote unquote easy to say. I see how a team would work together to do this. And other things feel very individual focused, right? Like you're not going to like together weld something, right? Like at the end of the day, there's one person like doing the welding, but there are all these components, all these ways that you're still going to lean on your team, rely on your team in order to be prepared for that moment and even prepared afterwards, right? Like that weld didn't necessarily go well. Like, let's go back, let's like work with someone, let's talk about where I need to make some adjustments. So it's a good flag, and just appreciate that, component of like, how does a team support an individual? And then how does that individual like lean on their team as they need their support?
Yeah, you don't see a lot of it at the competition per se. You see more of it in the classroom as they're preparing for those competitions. And when someone can't figure something out and they're going over and working with their classmate, or they're working with their teacher directly, to get more of that going with the team-based portion of that.
I'll open it up. I know we're going to move into some breakout rooms as you have kind of individual questions for the communities to engage with them. But I was going to say, if there's one question, and Eric just put one in the chat there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Joe's done a great job in District 300 there, kind of collecting some of that data. I know we had 9 students so far this year that have all earned at least one credential so far this year, not counting additional credentials that they had already earned in previous years. So mainly we're going after up to 5 credentials that students are going to earn. So the safety material from NIMS is the first one. Mill operator and mill setup are the other, are 2 more. And then lathe operator and lathe setup are the last 2. So 5 overall, that level 1 NIMS credential that we're working to earn. I think on average right now, we've been with students earning 3 or more credentials on average over the last couple of years.
All right. With that said, we're going to spend just maybe about 10 minutes here. And then I have some closing pieces. I'll check on rooms too to make sure it's enough time. But each room is going to be focused within one of those challenges, right? So if you're want to know more about education and meeting with the Ridgewood team here with Eric, are more interested too in that health sciences, wanting to dig in with the Waubonsee team or with manufacturing, you also should be able to putz in and out of there. So I'll kind of stay in the main room, pop in on rooms, and it can also help folks too, as you might need that help moving into your breakout rooms. Hello, everyone. Any questions that didn't get addressed or anything? I know sometimes it can feel abrupt as the rooms are closing. Or any kind of reflections, additional questions when thinking about team-based challenges for any of our presenters here, or just generally?
On behalf of Waubonsee, I know we had all of our contact info there at the end, and because I know I always leave these things and then I come up with all these questions later when I'm not here. So just don't hesitate to reach out to any of us.
Appreciate that.
Heather, I had one quick thing, and we didn't get to fully address it in our breakout room, but Eric brought up actually some great points with the interaction with the industry experts. And I think that's probably one of the more important issues, is, creating those relationships and driving that conversation with industry experts to partake in this work. But one thing that I kind of thought about in some of these is that the importance of that kickoff event of really driving the message of what that problem is that the students are facing as a team, and how the business partner or the industry partner plays a role in that kind of event. And so I was just wondering if you could kind of speak a little bit more to that, or if anyone had some examples of like some really great kickoff ideas for their team-based challenge. Because I really think that when you start a team-based challenge, that it should be something that really excites the kids and proposes a interesting question that they're like, oh, wow, we're actually solving a question that maybe could help our community or address a world problem.
I do agree that there's a, it may or may not be like a robust kickoff, right? Like if you're doing a one-day event, you might have that space for a kickoff, but if you're doing something maybe embedded within the course time, right? There is very much, and I think for some people, this is an easy, exciting shift. And for others, it's a little like, I don't know about this. Like, I'm going to let students drive the process. You have your instructors who are ready to go with that, right? They're ready to be the facilitators, let students run with it. There's others who are still kind of thinking about that project-based kind of mindset that I spoke to earlier. So it's the instructor piece. So who are you starting with as you're piloting these? Like, right, I think very much about this Waubonsee team, and the multiple times instructors said, like, we saw what was happening. We saw the feedback from students, we heard it, and we looked at our own practices and how we're preparing students, right? And so those are instructors who are really ready to receive that feedback and to do something with it, right? Which is super important. All that to say though, too, like your industry people, some of them are really ready to just let students drive the process, give information as needed without giving the answers, right? But helping probe and push and bring in information the students might not be thinking about, right? Because they just might not even know to think about it. They might not even know they're supposed to look into that research or that piece of information, but they need their expectation setting too, right? Like, who are you in this situation when you show up? How are you engaging with the young people? How are you not telling them what they should be doing and how they should be doing it, but really just kind of hearing from them, probing on it, giving them information as needed. So whether it's a formal kickoff at the beginning of an event or expectation setting as you're engaging with them and having, would you like to participate in this? Here's what your role is. Having that well-defined is super helpful. And I know we have some examples of that. I can kind of take a look too and see if I can put that in the follow-up. All right, let me do a few kind of wrap up next steps here. Thank you again, as always, to all of our presenters. Truly appreciate you. IWIN doesn't happen without all of you all. And so thank you for that. Just want to do a couple of things here. In case you missed it, we had a session a couple of weeks ago now. Again, I don't know if I even know what it is anymore. But so we had a community share about their school-based enterprise models. So thinking about those as your career development experience, how those qualify, meet those expectations, and also how they really do think about what is access, what is equity, what does scale look like, and kind of having that within your school-based system that still is very authentic and meets the needs of students. Some things that are coming up. So within the Illinois Success Network, we do have a policy working group who is looking at transportation and work-based learning. So they're meeting again on Wednesday, May 24th. And so would really love for you all or others that you might even suggest to be on here. There's a link to register, but we want to hear what the challenge is, what the needs are, what best practices are happening. It was spoken to earlier if you were on a presentation from ISB about work-based learning, but transportation can be a key barrier for access. And so really just trying to get, a report, recommendations, some things moving out in the system that are really taking in all the insights, the challenges, the needs, the questions that communities are having to get those addressed. And then our next IWIN coming up on May 23rd, the day before this working group, is we have a new resource that we've developed that captures different best practices, community models for how people are engaging young women intentionally in the manufacturing field. You're also going to hear from some of our communities who've done empathy interviews with young women, both in high school and at the college level. Like, what are they saying? What are the things that they need, that they would like to see in a manufacturing pathway? And just hear from some other communities about their models and activities that they do for that. So there's another link to register there. My information is here if you have any questions. And I know too, always shout out with Bill and Ben are on the line here. They have the PD, those workshops happening for some team-based challenge writing that I believe, as I'm looking at the names here, most folks have, but I'll include those in the follow-up as well for you all.